What's going on, everyone? Today I want to show off a really cool project called WaybackProxy. This allows you to peer into the old days of the internet. Best of all, it allows you to do so with an old retro computer to really get to experience things as they were. I initially saw a video by Science Elf a few months back and thought it was a pretty cool concept. I really enjoy reliving the good old days of the internet. I noticed a lot of people were asking how to make one for themselves, so I decided to dig in and build one for myself, document the process, and then make a video so others can enjoy it too. I decided not to follow it through with the screen and dial knob that you can see in the video here. I'll explain more on that later. Before we begin, let's talk about the Wayback Machine, which is where most of the magic for this is coming from. The Wayback Machine is a digital archive of the World Wide Web that is hosted as part of archive.org. They've been archiving web pages since May 10th, 1996. As of October 2023, they effectively have 858 billion web pages archived. In December of 2020, it was over 70 petabytes of data, which is pretty crazy. And you can use the Wayback Machine to manually search for web pages and manually select the months, the days, and the years to see these web pages, but it's not as fun as actually using the WaybackProxy device, which we'll go into more on that later as well. Now, it should be mentioned, it's not always complete backups of websites. Images, certain links, and search features within the sites can be broken. For instance, if you take a look at Netscape's page here, you'll notice that there are missing images. So expect to see broken pictures and other stuff like that. Anyhow, I'll show off a small handful of old-timey websites once we have things all up and running later on. Let me show you the magic and how this is all going to work. I figured what better way to show retro hardware images than to show it all off in Paint here. So to start, on the left we have the iMac G3 graphite version. We'll go ahead and draw a happy little face on this guy here. And so you'll have your retro machine, ideally, although you can certainly use a modern machine, but the formatting of the web pages and whatnot may be a little bit off. I have heard good things about Firefox being more lenient on old school website formatting. And then plugged into the iMac here is going to be the Raspberry Pi 4 B+. I believe this project will work with a Raspberry Pi 3 B+, but I have not tested it yet. Once I have confirmation on it, I will leave a little bit of info in the description with an update. So anyhow, from the Raspberry Pi 4 B+, we are then connecting to the internet wirelessly to our router. In this case, this is a good old-fashioned Linksys WRT54G to really bring back the good old days here. And then, of course, from here, it's all going right out to the internet. So effectively, what's happening is the old-school machine utilizing the Raspberry Pi as essentially an internet bridge to then connect out to the internet. And I'll go into more detail on how this is all going to work as we go through configuring one of these. Now let's move into the next portion of actually building one of these up. If you're unsure on how to install Raspberry Pi OS on an SD card for a Raspberry Pi, I do have a video on that, which will be in a link in the description below to get you to the point. One thing I do want to mention is that they did change up the Raspberry Pi Imager utility, so it's a little bit different, and I'm just going to do a quick little step through here of everything that you just need to set up. And so the very first portion on the left here, choose device. So this is new to the latest version of the Imager utility, where it actually asks you to select the model you're using, and then it will break it down to the compatible OSs for that specific model. So in my case, I'm going to select the Raspberry Pi 4 here. Operating system, we're going to choose OS. Now, one thing to mention here is that as of the making of this video, the latest version of Raspberry Pi OS, which is Bookworm, which is based on Debian Bookworm, has some slight issues in resolving URLs. There seems to be a 20 to 30 second gap between a URL actually resolving with the WaybackProxy device. So at least, like I said, at the time of this video, I recommend you use the previous version of Raspberry Pi OS, which would be under the legacy portion. And we don't need the desktop environment, so let's choose the other portion here for Raspberry Pi OS Other. And then let's scroll down a little here. So we don't want Bookworm, we want Bullseye. And let's choose the Raspberry Pi OS Legacy Lite, which is not going to have the desktop environment, and that's fine. And then just choose your storage, as I show in my previous video on this. And then let's hit next. And then let's do edit settings. And for the host name, I am going to put WaybackProxy in. The username, you can go ahead and put in a username here, so you can put in whatever you want for the username. I'm just going to put in WaybackProxy just to make it easier. And then I'm just going to put in a password for it. And then since we are effectively using this as a wireless internet bridge, you will need to configure the wireless LAN. So you would put in your wireless SSID here, and then you would also put in the password for it. So I'll just type in wireless here just to show, and then we'll just put some nonsense in there. And then naturally, because wireless is turned on, we need to change up the wireless LAN country. So let me just blank this out here. I'll put in my country, I'll hit enter, and then I will just double check that it does in fact select US here, as I'd mentioned in that video for Raspberry Pi OS. And then also let's set the locale settings and then just change it up to what you need it to be here. This looks fine for me. And then for services, let's enable SSH. And once again, depending on what you have, if you're very experienced with SSH, then you'll probably end up using the allow public key authentication only, and then you would put in your authorized keys here. However, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to leave it as just use the password authentication. And then under options, I'm going to disable enable telemetry, completely optional, but I feel I don't need to send data back to them. And then I'll just leave eject media when finished checked here. And then we'll go ahead and hit save. And with those settings now in place, then you would just hit yes here. And then it's going to ask you, are you sure? We'll hit yes. And then just be patient as it now starts writing the data to the SD card. All right, now that this is done, we'll just hit continue here. And then we can go ahead and close out of this. Now, before we continue on, I do want to give a shout out to the project that we are actually pulling this all from. So Richard G. 867's WaybackProxy project here is what we are going to be using and building up here. And it goes over the general information that I'll be mentioning in the video. And there is some customization that it mentions in here if you wanted to dig into. So certainly give this website a look over before you actually start dabbling in the project here, as there may be something that you do want clarification on that perhaps I didn't go over. And a lot of this will start making more sense as I start diving into things. There is also a Docker option that you can utilize. And then it also mentions the known issues and limitations section here. And then also a shout out to Will Haley's website, which is the process that we're going to use to make the Raspberry Pi into a wireless bridge. And it does mention the update here. It says this article no longer is maintained. However, this still has really good information that is a lot easier to go over than the official Raspberry Pi documentation here. And so at this point, go ahead and move the SD card that you just built up into your Raspberry Pi 4, and then we will begin the next process of the video. All right, I've got my Raspberry Pi 4 all fired up here. Now I am using PuTTY to SSH into it. If you're unsure of what the IP is of your device, then you can either go into your network router and take a look at the machines that are connected to it. You can also go ahead and plug an external monitor into it and then log into it with the credentials that you put in, and then just type in the command of IP space address, and then your hardwired Ethernet would be ETH0, and then this would be the IP here for your device. However, in my case, mine is not connected via hardwired Ethernet, and it's connected just to wireless. And this is actually my recommended way of doing it, is to just manage it via its wireless IP address, because when we turn it into a network bridge, this is no longer going to be a viable IP address that you can connect into it. So anyhow, with PuTTY, I just put in this IP address here, disregard the /24 on the end, and then that's how I was able to get into it. If you're unfamiliar with my previous videos on any projects that are Linux-based, I include a text document so that literally all you have to do is just copy and paste into your terminal window and essentially just follow along with this guide. Any area that has the asterisks and then brackets are really just statements mentioning what is happening. So you'll see it a few areas here, and you may see some optional sections as well, and I'll go over all of it as we continue on here. One thing to mention that is not in this document here is that this document expects that you've already patched the OS and all the packages on. So if you haven't done so already, then just initiate a sudo space apt get update, hit enter. Of course, depending on your internet connection and all that good stuff, it could take a moment. Next, let's do a sudo space apt get upgrade space -y, and this is just going to say yes to anything that actually needs updates without us having to manually tell it yes. So hit enter, and then just be patient as it pulls in all the updates, and then we will continue on when that is done. All right, now that the device is all up to date, let's begin with the very first portion of the text document here. So I have found that with a lot of the projects, if I have the automatic updates turned on, then something can get hosed. We're just going to turn the automatic updates off, but this is not killing off the capabilities of the device actually doing updates. It's just making it so that we just have to manually kick off updates when we feel we need to do them. So let's start with line 3 here. And by the way, one thing to mention is that I am using NotePad++ for this. So this is making it so that I can read off the line numbers here. So I do recommend that you use Notepad++ for this, or a specialty Notepad application that allows for it to show the line information here. Another thing to note also is that on occasion I may have to update the text document, in which case what you see in this video where I mention line numbers may have changed, and I will make note of any changes in the pinned comment section below. So we'll start with line 3 here, and so we'll copy and paste this in, hit enter, and let's move to line 5. This is going to disable the automatic updates. So the first one stopped automatic updates. This is now going to disable it. And then just to be safe, let's do a sudo reboot and then wait for it to come back up, and then we will continue on the process. All right, my Raspberry Pi 4 is back up. So let's continue on down the line here. So line 9, we're just going to initiate a sudo apt update, hit enter. This is just updating the package repository information. Next up, this is more or less a just in case. Some images I found have Git and Python 3 already, some don't. We're just going to go ahead and kick this off for line 11 and hit enter. And then it does have the -y on there, which states that it will just pull whatever is needed without us having to intervene here. All right, next up, let's go ahead and copy lines 13 through 15 here. This is going to change the directory to the opt directory, and then we are going to do a git clone from the Richard G867's Wayback Proxy, and then we are going to change the directory to the opt Wayback Proxy here. Paste that in and hit enter. Give it a little bit of time to pull everything down. All right, next up are going to be 2 optional areas. I'm just going to fire them up just to give you a quick glimpse of what is actually in these files. So we're going to copy line 19, paste it in, hit enter. Now to better explain this here, I'm going to show the Wayback Proxy's project page. And so this here is just a match to everything that you see here. So this breaks it down to the description of what all this stuff means. For the sake of this video, I am going to leave everything as is for this, but I did just want to reference kind of the pieces to the puzzle here. If you have any questions on this, then this explains it all right here. If you do change anything in here, then you would just do a Control-O and hit enter, and then Control-X to exit out and hit enter. So in this case, I did not change anything, so I'm just going to do Control-X, and that exits out. Next up is the other optional portion here, and so we will copy in line 23, paste it in, and this is literally just a whitelist that you can maintain. And once again, on the Wayback Proxy's page, it states here for number 2, optionally exclude domains from being proxied by adding them to this whitelist.txt file. In this case, once again, I'm not changing anything, so I'm just going to do Control-X, but I just wanted to go over that for the sake of this video. Next up, we just want to make sure the core components of this are actually working. So line 27, let's copy this and paste it in. And this is just to make sure that the Wayback Proxy with the base configuration here is working. So let's just hit enter, and then this looks fine here. This is all I expect to see. It just tells you that it's listening out on port 8888 and that the date is set to 2001 October 25th. And then I'm just going to do Control-C to stop it, which is what I have referenced on line 29 here. Next up, we are going to set up the Ethernet port to be in bridge mode. And so let's copy lines 33 to 34 and paste them in. And next, let's move on to lines 36. Copy that in, paste it in. And now it's going to show a blank section here. So this is where we have to copy in lines 40 through 78. So make sure you grab all of this here. Let's bring it down to 78. Copy and paste this in, like so. And then do a Control O. If you look down here, write out, Control O, hit Enter, Control X. Next, it's just really confirming a few things. So we're just going to do line 83, which is just mentioning that the bridge.sh file does in fact exist, so that's good. Next thing that I just like to do is confirm that the contents that we pasted in are actually still in there. This is a just in case thing, so line 85, paste that in, hit Enter. The contents are still here, that looks fine. Let's just do Control X just to exit. All right, next up, let's do line 89 here. Copy and paste this in and just be patient as it crunches as it is running a script. All right, with that now done, let's copy and paste in line 91, which is just making it so that it reboots. This is going to lock in the fact that the Ethernet port now is effectively a bridge, and we'll hit Enter. And so when I mentioned that it's a bridge, if you were to try to connect in an Ethernet cable into it, expecting to use that as the means for the Raspberry Pi to communicate out to the internet, it will no longer function that way. This is just a software configuration, so should you need to restore that functionality, then the best thing to do is just to create a new Raspberry Pi image on an SD card and then just start fresh. And we'll just be patient as it comes back up here. All right, the Raspberry Pi is back up. So moving along here, let's start with line 95. Copy this in. Once again, this is more testing just to make sure we did not run into any issues. So we just change the directory and let's kick off the WaybackProxy one more time here. Key thing is nothing has been corrupted here, so that's good. It appears to be working just as we expect it to. Control C to stop it. Now, one thing I will mention is that at this point, this actually is fully functioning. The next step I'm going to go over is really just making it so that it's easier to utilize this device without the need for any manual intervention to get it to work. So for instance, we are going to script it out so that the WaybackProxy just starts as a system service. So when the Raspberry Pi turns on, as soon as it's done loading in the key components of the OS and applications, then it automatically starts WaybackProxy without us having to effectively run these two lines here. So let's move on to line 103, copy and paste this in. And if the terminal is not at the ready state here, just do the Control C to stop it. Paste this guy in, hit Enter. This is blank because we are creating it. So next up, let's copy in lines 107 to 117 as mentioned here. Copy these in, paste it in. Should look like this. And then do a Control O to write it out. Hit Enter, Control X to exit. Next, let's do line 120. Copy, paste this in, hit Enter. Now line 122, copy and paste it in. Hit Enter. Line 124, copy and paste it in, hit Enter. And then finally line 126, copy and paste that in, and hit Enter. And this just mentions that the status of the service, this is key here, that it is green and it states it's running. If it's in red and it says it's stopped, then I would just recommend rebooting the Raspberry Pi and trying line 126 again and seeing that it actually is in a active running state. If it's not, then I would recommend double checking line 103, double checking the contents of lines 107 to 117 are in the section, and then just go right down the line of 120, 122, 124, and then see if it's working in line 126 again. Now at this point, I actually do recommend doing a reboot, which I will add a line in here. So let's do sudo reboot, and then just be patient as it comes back up. And at this point, we no longer need to use the SSH PuTTY terminal here. And then one thing just to mention in line 130, which I will be going over, is just kind of a note section here that we will utilize. All right, so the next thing that you would do at this point is plug the Raspberry Pi into the machine that you're going to be using. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be showing it with two retro devices. However, as I had mentioned, you can do this with a modern computer, but the formatting of the web pages is potentially going to be broken using a more modern browser. And as I'd mentioned, modern versions of Firefox supposedly can display things relatively okay, so I'm just throwing that tidbit out there. I apologize for having to show pictures of the Mac OS side, as my iMac G3 was not cooperating with my video capture device. So I took some pictures of it here, which are a little iffy, but hopefully these will come out okay for the video. So the first thing that you would do for a Mac OS device is that you would go up to the top left corner, click on the Apple symbol, select System Preferences. With System Preferences open, under Internet and Network, you would click on Network, which is the globe. With Network now open, look for the Proxies tab all the way to the right, and then under the Proxies tab, you would want it to look exactly like this. So with the bridge mode activated for the Ethernet port on the Raspberry Pi, it effectively is giving an IP address of 10.1.1.1, and then as we had seen as we were doing tests firing up WaybackProxy, it is listening by default on port 8888, and then just make sure you have web proxy HTTP checked, and then you would just do apply now, and then I would also recommend that you just reboot the Mac OS device before you continue on with testing it. Now with the device that I'm actually able to show you real-time video captures of, it's an old Pentium 3 laptop that I've got that's running Windows 2000 on it, and let me show you the way to configure Internet Explorer version 6. In this case, I already have it configured, but I'm going to go through the process of showing it off, so that's why this is already popping up like this. So if we go up to Tools up top, go to Internet Options, go to the Connections tab. Down in the bottom here where it says Local Area Network LAN Settings, let's click on LAN Settings, and then make it look exactly like this. So make sure to check the user proxy server for your LAN. These settings will not apply to dial-up or VPN connections. And then just as I showed off for the Mac OS side of things, the IP address needs to be 10.1.1.1 on port 8888. And then, like I said, leave everything as it looks in this capture here. Hit OK again. And the thing that I do recommend is that you reboot your machine just to make sure that all these settings are actually holding in place. So one thing I had mentioned that I was going to explain more on is in the Science Elves video where they show off that their WaybackProxy device has the knob on it and it's got the screen. The thing that the knob is doing is it's adjusting the month, day, and year to what they want it to be. However, there is a pretty easy way to utilize that functionality without needing the knob and seeing a screen and whatnot. As I'd shown off in the very bottom of my text document there that has all the commands that we pasted in to build this whole thing up, is it has the web.archive.org URL. And so what that actually is it's actually a configuration URL page within the Wayback Proxy. And what I'm effectively doing here is I went ahead and just opened another window of Internet Explorer and I went to that page. And so it's literally just giving us the option that we can go in here and set the date to get pages right here. So it starts off as year, month, and then day, and then your date tolerances, and then all your different options here. When you make an adjustment here, just click on save and it will automatically kick in. And so the best thing really to do for this is just favorite it and then just use this as your means of setting the configurations for the month, day, and year that you're trying to scope out for the old school internet goodness. So for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave the page date as is. And so at this point, everything is fully functional. And so depending on the date range that you set up, certain websites may not have actually been around at that time. And so in this case, the generic MSN page that would have popped up here isn't actually available in this date range. And that's fine. But I can do, for instance, www.netscape.com WaybackProxy.com. And it should load up in just a few seconds here. And then we're hit with the Tuesday, October 9th, 2001 Netscape page here. This is the page that I used earlier in the video that I stated had the broken images and whatnot. But you can feel free to scope out things within here. You can see what breaks. Completely forgot about Netscape's Instant Messenger here. If you try to use like the search functionality, we'll just type in google.com here. It's most likely broken as the search portion has not been captured. So not found, that's fine. We can go to another throwback. Let's go to Yahoo in its prime. Nowadays, I completely forget that Yahoo even exists. But here's yahoo.com back in 2001. One thing that's pretty funny is to see Microsoft launches Windows XP. Let's click on that and actually see if it exists. It does. So yeah, it is pretty cool to be able to utilize a retro machine to see everything as it was at that date and time, clicking on articles, scoping it out for a good laugh. In this case, if we go to Microsoft's website, then I'm sure it's probably plastered with Windows XP stuff. Great operating system, by the way. I've got some Windows XP launch offers where we can save some money on hardware and software. It's pretty amazing. We can also go to apple.com, and the original iPod just released at this point in time, which is very, very throwback. And then maybe you want to reimagine that time that you are really looking forward to some cool game that was coming out. Let's go to blizzard.com. And then what's this? World of Warcraft? What could that possibly be? Well, I can't wait for this game to be out. Or maybe you want to go back to the good old days of Newgrounds. There's just something about old web pages that just have a lot of life to them. Unlike modern web pages now that just seem so lifeless and bleak. But anyhow, I could do an entire video on just trying to scope out the good old days of web pages and whatnot, but I just wanted to give this quick little demonstration of how this is all working. And I didn't even change the date range for the sake of this video, but for you, feel free to dig into everything. Like I said, you can go all the way back to May 10th, 1996 and try to scope out some really, really old websites. Or you may even just want to take a look at a website from 2 years ago. You have the option within this, although obviously more modern websites you probably wouldn't want to use a retro machine for, and you would just use a more modern machine for it. Otherwise you're going to have all sorts of weird issues with formatting and whatnot. Anyhow, that is all you need to do to get a Wayback Proxy device configured and up and running. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. If you've not checked out my other project videos on my channel, I do invite you to check them over. Lots of interesting projects and many more to come. I also invite you to leave a comment with old school websites you found that really bring back the memories. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.